to start.
Thanks, Andrea. Want to thank everybody for joining on. My topic today is backyard black raspberry production. My email is up there. If you have questions you think of later, feel free to email me. I also have a Facebook page for the horticulture program over here. You can log into that, check that out as well. Want to thank Andrea and the other hort agents for putting this series together here. Lots of good topics coming up, so I encourage you to join on in the future and share with your friends and families and things. This is a somewhat timely topic. The reason I picked this topic, I'll tell you right now, black raspberries are not my favorite fruit to grow, but for a homeowner, they're one of the easier fruits to grow. Commercially, there's a few challenges that I would want to discuss with you in further conversations before you stepped up to a commercial production. But for a homeowner, this is one of the easier small fruits to produce. And so I thought that this would be appropriate as people are thinking now about producing more of their own fruit, vegetables at home. This would be one that most people could have success with fairly easily. The black raspberry is native to this region of the United States. This is a figure from the USDA plants.gov website just showing its native range. So this isn't anything unusual. It's not a foreign fruit or anything. This is a native thing, which does make it advantageous, and we're not trying to do anything unusual. It does make it a bit of a challenge on the other hand, because they do grow native, so there are native insects, native diseases and things that can also be a bit of a challenge as well. Goes by a couple of different names, black raspberries. The scientific name is Rubus occidentalis, wild black raspberry, black caps, thimbleberry, scotch cap, various things. This is the fruit that we're talking about there in the top figure. That was from a planting I had here at the Robinson Center over in Breathitt County, the old quicksand station, looking at some variety trials. Below that, you see red raspberries and blackberries. Both the red raspberries and the black raspberries are in the genus Rubus, so they're related to the black raspberry, but they're not identical to it. The difference between raspberries and blackberries, the easiest way to explain it right now, other than some genetic differences and things, is with a blackberry, when you pick the fruit off of the cane, the receptacle inside the fruit stays inside the blackberry. Whereas with raspberries, the black raspberry and the red raspberry, the receptacle stays attached to the cane. And that's why you get those little hollow fruits that are just basically a little cone of fruit. Drupelets is what they are, surrounding what would have been the receptacle. That's one of the reasons why raspberries commercially, they're sold in half-pint containers. Blackberries can be sold in quart containers, just because there's nothing to support that fruit there, and you stack them too high, they squish and you end up with a mess in there, which is fine if you're making jams, but if you want to eat them whole, that receptacle does provide some fruit, some support to the fruit and things, so they are sold differently. But that's the main difference between raspberries and blackberries for this discussion right here. A thing to keep in mind with black raspberries, there is a wild variety. There was also a commercial variety that was produced that are primocane bearings. Primocane is a term that I want to explain here initially. That means that the fruit would be produced on the cane that comes up in the spring of the year. It comes up on the first cane. Primocane is a first cane. Floricane, like you see in my slide there, that's a second year cane. What happens is with a floricane, it comes up the first year in the spring as a primocane. It doesn't flower that year. It has to go through a chilling period in the winter time. And then during the winter time, it undergoes some transition. The floral buds form, and then the following spring, it flowers and produces fruit. And so it bears fruit on the 2-year-old wood, not the 1-year-old wood, like primocane bearing. If you're familiar with the ever-bearing red raspberries or some of the newer primocane bearing blackberries, they produce fruit on that 1-year-old wood. The advantage to that is every year at the end of the season, you can just cut those canes down and they come back up. So there's a much simpler pruning process involved with that. With the floricane production, like your standard blackberries, your summer bearing red raspberries, or your traditional black raspberries, most of those are floricane bearing. So there's more elaborate pruning that's involved. The cane comes up the first year with black raspberries, which is what I'm specifically talking about right now, is when the cane reaches about chest height, around 4 foot or so. That cane is still soft, and you can just come along and snap that top off of the cane. And that will cause the lateral shoots to come off of the primocane that's come up. And over the winter, or during the summer, that first year, those lateral shoots will extend. During the winter time, at the end of the first year, you shorten up those laterals, and most of your fruit production is going to be on those lateral shoots coming off of what becomes the floricane. With your primocane bearing raspberries, your fruit production is right on that primocane. There's very few lateral shoots that are produced. So there is a little bit more elaborate production involved. And with your floricanes, after they produce fruit on that 2-year-old wood, that cane dies. And then you could go ahead and prune it out because it won't produce any more fruit after that. So it's a little bit more elaborate pruning process involved, but it's not really that difficult. So that's the main difference. There are primocane bearing black raspberries out there. And one of the reasons that I'm going to get into why I like the black raspberries is because they're early producing fruit early in June and things. This is the problem. I really like red raspberries. I like blackberries as well. But a few years ago, half dozen years or so, this new insect, Drosophila suzukii, the spotted winged Drosophila, came into Kentucky. It's an Asian pest that's come over. We had native fruit flies in Kentucky. If you ever left a cantaloupe sitting out on the counter too long, or a watermelon or something, you would see fruit flies buzzing around your overripe fruit. This is an imported pest. And this picture, there's a couple of links there that will tell you more about that from the Department of Entomology. That's where this picture and a couple of other pictures come from, are from those entomology fact sheets on those websites. But this is the spotted winged Drosophila. This is a female. The female doesn't have spots on the wings. That white picture on her wing right there is just a reflection from the flash. That's not actually the spot. The male spotted winged Drosophila has the spots on his wing, and it's a dark spot. But the arrow here is pointing to 2 identifying characteristics, so you can identify this fruit fly from other fruit flies. On the left of your screen is the ovipositor. That's the egg-laying structure for the female here. That's different than our native fruit flies. And also that cross vein in her wings will also help to identify the female spotted winged Drosophila. But this is a close-up of her ovipositor. This is the business end of the fruit fly, and this is why it's such a challenge. With this imported fruit fly, her ovipositor is serrated. Think steak knife, not hypodermic needle. With our native fruit flies, their egg-laying structures, their ovipositors, are like a hypodermic needle. They have to have damaged skin on the surface of the fruit in order to penetrate her ovipositor into that fruit to lay her eggs in there. With this imported spotted winged Drosophila, she can actually come along with her ovipositor because it's hardened and serrated like a steak knife, and she can actually cut a slit in the fruit skin and lay her eggs in undamaged fruit. And that's why this is such a challenge. With our native fruit flies, you had to have damaged fruit in order for the fruit fly to lay her eggs. With this imported fruit fly, they make their own slit in the skin and cause a problem. So that's why, even though I really like red raspberries and blackberries as well, our fruit fly here, it does overwinter as an adult. And I've put out traps here at our research station. Dr. Besson, our state entomologist, has had traps across the state. He has a website on Facebook, SWDINKY on Facebook. Spotted winged Drosophila in Kentucky is that. I can send you that link if you need or something, but that's where he monitored the development of the fruit flies across the state with this non-native fruit fly. Even though they overwinter as adults, I usually didn't trap any of them in my traps until the last week in June or the first week in July. So they're out there, but their population isn't large enough that it reaches a significant economic threshold that they're infesting the fruit in large numbers. Once you get beyond that end of June, 1st of July, which is when most of our summer-bearing red raspberries, our ever-bearing red raspberries, and our blackberries come on, they come on from July later into the season. They're around, the population is higher, there's more potential for infestation in your fruit. And that's why for a homeowner, I would recommend black raspberries over red raspberries or blackberries, simply because you're going to have less problem with this fruit fly pest in your berries than you would with the other brambles. I will say that there are some very fine mesh netting out there that's available that will help to protect your brambles if you wanted to grow some of the other things. We do have some sprays that are available. Anybody that's interested commercially, we do have our small fruit, tree fruit pest management guide that has recommendations for sprays and things for that that's available. The netting that's available is kind of pricey though. So if you were just going to have 1 or 2 bushes, it wouldn't be real economical to protect 1 or 2 bushes. But in Europe, places like that, they're actually looking at netting the inside of high tunnels, producing brambles inside tunnels that have been lined with this very fine mesh netting to produce blackberries, raspberries, and high tunnels and things. In terms of other insects, there are other insects that may be a problem with the black raspberries, but they're not huge problems. Sap beetles and yellow jackets would really only be a problem if you didn't pick your fruit, you let it get overripe. That's when those insects will move in. Japanese beetles can be a sporadic problem. I fight them every year in my hops over here. We just seem to be a hotbed for Japanese beetles problems over here. For a backyard producer, the raspberry cane borer or the crown borer really wouldn't be a significant problem for you to grow. You know, if you're growing 6 or a dozen bushes in your backyard, that would give you enough fruit as a home gardener. People always wonder, well, what do I need to be considered to produce to be a commercial producer? Rule of thumb that I like to use for commercial production is if you're producing more than a 1/4 acre of small fruit, you're at a commercial scale already. People don't appreciate the amount of labor that's involved in small fruit production. And typically mites, if we have a hot, dry year, mites may be a problem in your brambles as well. In years where it's lower temperatures or more humidity, more rain, the mites get knocked off and typically aren't a problem. So insects other than the spotted winged Drosophila typically aren't going to be a problem for you, significant problem. I mean, they can be a challenge, but they're not going to be a significant problem for you. There's a couple of diseases that can be a problem. The first one, verticillium. If any of you grow tomatoes, you know that you typically look for tomatoes that are listed as being VFN, which stands for verticillium, fusarium, and nematode resistant. Verticillium is a soil-borne disease. It infests the solanaceous crops, your tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, potatoes, things like that. And it survives for many years in the soil. So if you've had problems with verticillium, which is that first picture on the screen there, that's what verticillium will look like in the black raspberry planting. It's a root disease. It interferes with water uptake, nutrient uptake, various other things. It's a serious problem, and then you need to move to a different area. Years ago, when we had a lot more tobacco production and people would fumigate, that would help to manage that disease. So that might be something that you're aware of. If you know you have a problem with verticillium, you would want to consider something different. You could put up a raised bed, fill it with potting mix, and then that would solve that problem as well. Phytophthora root rot, which is the second picture of that, when you peel back the outer layer on the root of a raspberry plant, it gets that little brick red color that you can see there. Root rot is a problem in many different plants as well, and it's caused by saturated soils. And viral diseases will be your other type of disease. It could be an issue because these are native plants, and so any of your wild brambles that might be around you could potentially harbor some of these viral diseases. So I always try and encourage people to manage any wild brambles around their planting if they can, just to decrease the possibility of diseases spreading from your wild plants. Here's some nice guidelines, some fact sheets that are available from the Department of Plant Pathology. They have some excellent resources on their website about different bramble diseases, things like that. So I encourage you to check that out as well. In terms of selecting the site for your planting, now is a good time to get your soils tested. Soils should be well drained. Brambles don't like wet soils. You'll have problems with the Phytophthora root rot. Good air movement is important as well to slow down potential spread of disease. A pH of 5.5 to 6.5 up to 7, that general condition that we're looking for our vegetable soils, other fruit crops other than blueberries. Just that slightly acid soil, that's ideal for bramble production. 2 to 4% organic matter would be real nice. I've yet to see any significant amounts of soil samples in Kentucky that have up to 4% organic matter. Most of our soils in Kentucky are low in organic matter, so if you have time, you didn't want to plant this year, you just wanted to develop your site, get it ready, make sure your soils are in good shape in terms of pH and nutrients. Now would be a good time to put some cover crops down, build up some organic matter in your soil, and have that available. If you get it up to 2%, that would be real good. Ideally 500 feet from wild brambles to slow down the potential spread of diseases from wild brambles, and avoid sites that were in sod the previous year. That's because white grubs, the rose chafer grub, the Japanese beetle grub, they like to eat on roots of plants, and they're typically infest sod soils. So just a general good vegetable garden site, good fruit growing site is kind of what you're looking for. If you don't know how to take a good soil test, there is a fact sheet out there, AGR 16, and a shout out to Bracken County Extension. When you Google this fact sheet from the University of Kentucky, AGR 16, the Bracken County Extension website comes up as the first place to find that fact sheet. So they've done a real good job in keeping that out there. But the main thing to keep in mind when you're doing a soil sample is you don't want to take your soil sample into a galvanized bucket or into a rubber bucket, because that will potentially contaminate your soil. So just a clean plastic bucket is what you need. Typically somewhere around a cup to 2 cups of soil from your garden area would be what you want. But that link to the fact sheet will show you any good suggestions you need for taking a good soil sample as well. Planting, I always encourage people to purchase good quality plants. If you go out and dig them up from the wild, you're just potentially bringing in any diseases that are with them. Buy the best quality you can, preferably virus indexed. There are good nursery sources out there. Feel free to contact me. I can tell you where we get some of our plants from when we're doing research places. Weed control is something people always wonder about, and what I recommend is go ahead and plant into a 3 to 4 foot wide weed-free strip. Landscape fabric can be used, and I'll show you a picture in a later slide of what we did when I was working for Ohio State at the Piketon Research and Extension Center there. We had a large black raspberry planting out there doing some research on that. And we use landscape fabric over a shallow raised bed. You can create a simple raised bed just going down with one side of your row with a single bottom plow and back up the other side, or bring in compost, well-rotted compost, and mix it into your soil. It doesn't have to be a large bed. You could put up a large bed if you wanted and just basically grow in a container, but even 3 to 6 inches will help give you good drainage and will cut down on your amounts of root rot and things. But then we covered up that shallow raised bed with a landscape fabric. One of the secrets to using landscape fabric is you don't cut a hole in the landscape fabric, but you burn a hole with a propane torch. That keeps the fabric from fraying and blowing in the wind and things. Because the black raspberries, they grow from a single crown. The new shoots come up from the crown. Those primocanes come up from the crown every year. They don't spread down the row like the ever-bearing red raspberries do and form a hedge of canes coming up every year. So they stay put from a single crown. So you just burn a hole, and I would recommend covering over that landscape fabric if you do choose to use it with either pine straw or wood nuggets, something like that, or even just go ahead and whitewash it. Because what we found with our research there is because brambles are fairly shallow rooted, in the areas where we were using the landscape fabric, it was impacting the growth of the plant slightly because it would warm up quickly. You have a black fabric that absorbs heat and shallow roots, and so that was somewhat impacting a little bit the growth of the plants as well. So just put a little something over top of it to help keep those roots a little bit cooler in July and August, and that will certainly help the growth of your plants as well. This shows our planting up at Piketon. You can just see a little bit there how shallow that raised bed was. That was just a little hump about 3 inches or so. The trellis system for black raspberries is much simpler than is required for your blackberries and things. It was simply a T-post with a 1x4, and then we would stretch a piece of baling twine or number 9 wire or high tensile wire down either side of that row just to support the new canes from flopping over as they would come up, and that made it easier to keep it mowed between the rows and things. So not a very elaborate system that's required at all. As I said, when the primocanes come up in the spring, they reach about 4 foot. You break that tip off, it will shoot out laterals. Those laterals will get to be 8 to 12 feet long over the summer. That winter, after that first year, you come back, you shorten up your laterals to 12 to 16, 18 inches, cut off any of the winter damaged parts, and most of your fruit production is going to be on those laterals. Then after they fruit, you can either cut them out then or you can wait until the following winter and cut them up, because every year it's going to be sending up new primocanes. The one thing I do want to mention while I talk about it, that first year of planting, those primocanes won't grow erect. They'll just kind of sprawl all over the ground. And so you might want to put up your trellis system and try and prop them up if you want to mow or something. But don't be shocked if that first year they don't grow erect. The following year, when the primocanes do come up, they will grow erect. And it's just that first year they flop all over the place. In terms of variety selection, we do have a fact sheet on the horticulture website there, growing blackberries and raspberries in Kentucky, that Terry Jones and Dr. John Strang produced a few years ago. They have a couple of varieties listed in that as well. The first 3 on there, Bristol, Jewel, and Mac Black, are easier to find than some of the other varieties that are out there. When you eat an apple, you can tell the difference between a Granny Smith, a Gala, and a Honeycrisp. Myself, I can't tell any difference between any of the flavor on the black raspberry varieties. I will tell you the one that I would pick out of any of them that are available out there is I would pick Jewel. It's about 1/3 larger than Bristol or Mac Black. Bristol would be your first variety that's commercially available that is produced, but the berries are a little bit smaller than Jewel, and there's also a potential from damage with a late frost. Jewel is mid-season. It's done production, at least here in Breathitt County, before the spotted winged Drosophila becomes an issue. They're a good-sized berry. After Jewel, Mac Black comes on about a week after Jewel. That's late season, and you're potentially getting into the time when the spotted winged Drosophila could become an issue in your fruit. And then Munger and Allen are also very late season varieties when you could very well have problems with things. Black raspberry is an interesting crop. Most of it commercially produced is actually produced in the Pacific Northwest. Here in the East, it's used for fresh consumption. The production in the Pacific Northwest is for processing and things. But there's lots of varieties out there. There was a publication put out from the New York State Ag Experiments Station in Geneva on the Finger Lakes there in 1925, Small Fruits of New York, that had over 252 varieties named. There were some primocane varieties named out there. One of the things that we were really interested in a few years ago when I was at Ohio State is looking at some of these primocane production things. We were trying to extend the season, reduce the pruning labor that was involved. We wanted to just be able to mow them off every year like the ever-bearing red raspberries. But again, that was before the spotted wing Drosophila came on, because with your ever-bearing production, it's a longer season until your fruit is produced, because that cane has to come up, produce the floral buds, flower, and then produce fruit. So your ever-bearing red raspberries are late season. Your primocane-bearing blackberries are late season. Your primocane-bearing black raspberries would also be late season. I would encourage you for more information if you're really interested in fruit production. We have a great website at the Center for Crop Diversification within the Horticulture Department. Not just fruit, but vegetables and things as well. There's budgets for people that are interested in commercial production, marketing tips, all sorts of information out there available as well. Happy to try and take any questions that people would have now and things. Encourage you to contact your county agents, myself as well, if you have any questions. Thank you for joining on. And again, please share these webinars with your friends and family, anybody that might potentially be interested. We're trying to do things in a different manner with the situation that's out there, but we're still here working hard for you. Just a shout out to the agents for doing such a great job and pulling all this together.
All right. Well, thank you, Sean, for doing that presentation for us today. Amy has posted a link to the presentation. So if you want it printed, there's a PDF version you guys can print from home. Then we're also going to post, I think Amy has the link I sent her earlier with the Qualtrics survey. I'd ask you all, please fill out the Qualtrics survey. Tell us what you thought. Give us ideas for stuff in the future. And this that helps us to make sure we are justifying continuing these in the future. So if you all fill the Qualtrics survey out for us, it would be greatly appreciated. I'm going to put up a ending poll just so you all can tell us kind of what you thought. So here's the ending poll, and watch the link for the Qualtrics survey as well. Now I'm going to stop the recording now, and I'm going to try to